everybody. Welcome back to the Last Rep. I'm Bob Chick along with David Bay, back in the hot seat once again, my friend. And this past week has been not short of activity in the world of bodybuilding.
Speaking of hot seats, it's definitely been interesting. There's a few big competitions, a little bit of social media and online drama, so it's definitely been interesting. Not something that we haven't seen before, but it seems like it's reaching a bit of a peak as far as that whole situation is concerned.
Well, interesting because the competition themselves have not been exactly stellar. Past the Arnold that was here, again, we went over that. Not the deepest lineup we've ever seen. It was off to New Zealand, and our good friend Mo putting that show out in New Zealand once again. He's the, I guess we'll call him the country chairman. I don't know what kind of district it is. I think it's just one big area.
Yeah, he's the chairperson of or representative for New Zealand,
right.
Managing the entire country.
Yeah.
Country.
Throws me off, you know. I'm not used to actually calling it by country, but anyway, Mo El Masawi, an IFBB pro, as most people know by now, putting that one on. This was a interesting show. We saw the emergence of Brandon Curry, again, much anticipated because, as everybody knows, he was in Kuwait with the Camel crew, doing his thing. Update shots look great, so now you just kind of got to that point where you're wondering, like, all right, is this guy going to bring it at the show, or is it going to be the same old Brandon Curry? It was anything but the same old Brandon Curry.
Yeah, no, I still think he could have been a tad bit sharper, but this is his first time prepping and I believe Abdullah's doing his prep, but the Camel crew, as people know it. But he was definitely sharper than he's been in the past and a lot bigger and a lot fuller. And it's easy to forget, we've seen so many disappointing finishes by Brandon over the last handful of years. It's easy for people to forget. He's a guy who's been in the top 10 at the Olympia. He used to be a little bit more consistent than he has been over the last few years, and people who haven't followed him through his whole career might not remember that. But he used to be a relatively consistent guy. He's consistently has an amazing physique, and so he's always one of these guys. He's not really a young guy, but he's a lot like Dexter Jackson in that he's got a young looking physique. There's nothing beat up about it. He has no injuries that throw off his symmetry or his aesthetics. So for him, it's just a matter of, everybody's just been saying, it's just a matter of he needs to nail it as far as the conditioning. Well, what people didn't really take into consideration is that there's still room for him to grow. And so this wow factor that we got from Brandon is not only the same aesthetics as we've seen with him before, but a much larger Brandon and better conditioning than we've seen in a while. So I think there's renewed hope for Brandon Curry. And as far as I'm concerned, he can be a guy that's top 10 at the Olympia if he's razor sharp. He's got to be a little bit tighter, I think, than we saw him over the past couple shows, but he's definitely still got a ton of potential, and with his added mass while maintaining the lines that he has, he can be a threat big time.
Absolutely. Well, listen, he brought it, and he rightfully deserved it. I mean, it was, probably the best Brandon Curry we've seen thus far, maybe even since he turned pro, because it was a much bigger Brandon Curry. And I agree with you, David. That physique right there is a threat. Not only for the top 10, but maybe even the top 6. Obviously depending on who's standing next to you and all those type of things. But it was the big showdown that was anticipated. That was Big Country, of course, making his first appearance at the New Zealand, and Brandon Curry. And I think most people would have been betting on Big Country to take this one home, especially after his very good showing at the Arnold that was here in Columbus. But it wasn't a better Dallas McCarver, and I think there were some reasons behind that. Personally, I think he was in uncharted waters with all the travel. I mean, listen, that's a long flight. You've done it.
Absolutely.
So it's going to wreak some havoc. He did not have his coach, Chad Nichols, there with him. That's going to be a problem, obviously, when you're first starting a program. I mean, he's only been through this once. That was for the Arnold here. So I think there's a bunch of contributing factors. But amongst many, I think just being in uncharted waters is enough to throw you off like that.
Yeah, people who haven't traveled internationally, or especially traveled internationally under physical distress, it's hard for them, I really think, to comprehend just how much of a toll that takes on your body. I know when I went to New Zealand a few years ago, I had a few days in Australia to adjust as far as trying to get my body clock in some sort of a rhythm. But I think that people really aren't taking that into consideration. That I know Dallas hasn't competed internationally before, and I'm trying to think back. We had this conversation. I'm trying to think back to the shows I was at internationally: South Africa, Australia, over at FIBO. And I don't really remember seeing Dallas at a lot of that stuff. So obviously I can't speak, specifically, but I don't think he's had a lot of international travel experience. And I'm 99% sure that this was his longest flight. Now, you guys, Auckland, New Zealand is 18 hours ahead of New York time. But when you fly there, you go west. So Dallas had to fly from Boca Raton, Florida, to California. I don't know how, that's a 6-7 hour flight. Then from California, probably connected somewhere in Australia. And then after 14, 15 hours on a plane to get to Australia, probably had another 3-4 hours to get to New Zealand. Now, mind you, he did this the Tuesday after the Arnold, I believe, when he left. So
right.
basically, had photo shoots and a day to eat a little bit on Sunday, probably went home, packed his stuff, and hopped on a plane on Tuesday. So, look, I'm not trying to make excuses for Dallas at all or anything like that. But if you haven't traveled internationally like that, it's very difficult physically just, to get on a sleep schedule and all that. And then the other thing is flying and traveling like that affects everybody's body very differently. Most people will say that it makes them hold water a little bit. The pressurized cabin, flying at altitude. I think Dexter Jackson is the only guy I've ever talked to that says he gets drier when he flies.
Yeah,
he goes, I get dry when I fly. That's what Dexter always said. But there's a lot of things that Dallas had going against him. Now, and just in the interest of full disclosure, Dallas wasn't at his absolute sharpest at the Arnold.
No.
So that wasn't the best Dallas that we've ever seen. It might have been one of his better overall packages, as big as he was and as full as he was, and his conditioning wasn't bad. It just wasn't razor sharp. So he had a week to tighten up. And I think had we seen Dallas go from a show in Columbus to a show in Florida or California, that we may have seen an improved version of him. But having to travel, total travel time with layovers and stuff, he was probably looking at 35, 40 hours. And the time changes. It wasn't doing his body any favors, let's put it that way.
Well, and let's keep things in perspective here. Listen, it was not the best Dallas we've seen at the Arnold Columbus. However, it was a very good and very improved Dallas McCarver. Listen, the kid's outstanding. I mean, he has definitely got a bright future.
He's 25.
Yeah, and when I say kid, he is literally half my age. So, yeah, he's a kid. And he took second to Cedric. I mean, so I think people are being a little bit too rough on him when it comes to that. Now, that said, it also wasn't the worst Dallas I've ever seen in New Zealand. Again, same thing there. People make it sound like he showed up looking like complete garbage, and that's just not the case. So
Brandon Curry is a good bodybuilder.
Yeah.
And when Brandon is at his best, he's also a top 10 Olympia bodybuilder. In fact, I think his best placing is 8th, the same placings as Dallas. And I think just because we've seen Brandon be off so much lately, and I'm in that same boat, I thought it was a win for Dallas. In fact, I talked to Dallas a couple of months ago already, and I said, well, Mo's having a show in New Zealand. And I thought it would be a good idea for him, because just I figured he'd be in a little bit better shape for the Arnold. He'd be able to pop over to New Zealand. I made the mistake of thinking, hey, this will be an easy win for you. And then you shift over to Australia. Wasn't the case.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, I would challenge that, actually, those advices. And
I might have given him bad advice.
You may have given him the wrong advices, David. You got to watch that, buddy.
It wasn't on. I promise, Dallas. It wasn't on purpose.
Well, here's my take, and again, everybody's got their 2 cents on it. Here's mine, okay? He's a young kid. He's very inexperienced. You've got a coach you just started working with who was apparently not going to make that trip. I never would have advised, if I'm running Big Country's camp, okay, I would never have advised him to go overseas immediately after the Arnold here, especially on a second-place finish. I think he maybe should have shut it down and then maybe regroup for maybe Brazil or a show around there. Obviously you want to qualify for the Olympia and give Chad another opportunity, of course, to get his physique honed in, to figure out, how his body reacts to his program and all that. It's all very new. I'm not so sure going overseas. Like I say, you're a 25-year-old kid. You have no experience overseas with flying for that amount of hours. You don't have your coach with you. You're very much on your own. We all see the videos that Dallas put out. He was very emotional, throughout the week, again, which is not uncommon when you're dieting, low carbon, you're out of the country, you're on your own. I mean, listen, a lot can happen in your mind, when you're dealing with all that.
Yeah, and I just definitely, I'm not going to argue with you on that, but I understand where Dallas is coming from. And look, Tony Doherty has been putting on a rock star show in Australia for a lot of years, and Mo does a great job too. And it's one of those things
Yep.
that anybody who's been there knows. And there's a reason why those shows work. It's look, nobody's flying to Australia for a crappy show where
Right.
a promoter puts them on the back burner. And Tony realizes that, and that's why he's been able to be successful. So I think if you're a young guy and you have this opportunity to go to a show and look, going to Australia is a huge, I don't want to say dream, but it's a great opportunity for a lot of people. We're talking outside of bodybuilding, Americans here, and I'm sure all over. Oh, it's a chance to go to
Yeah,
Australia.
sure.
And from an experience opportunity, from a travel opportunity, I think it probably looks pretty good to Dallas saying, hey, I can go to Australia and New Zealand. And on top of all that, again, the guys who run these events over there, they do a really good job at taking care of the athletes that are traveling distances, set them up with, gym and supplement appearances and stuff like that. So I understand why he went. But yeah, I mean, from your standpoint, at his age and with his level of experience, first time working with a new coach, might have been maybe a little bit wiser idea to back it off a little bit, but I
Well,
understand where he's coming.
and here's the thing. I mean, I have not talked to Chad about this situation. I don't know what his, personal situation was, whether he couldn't make the trip for other reasons, whatever, or if it was ever even presented as such. I don't care how much it would have cost. If it was $10,000 to get Chad Nichols there, and he was available to make that, or willing to make that trip, it would have been worth it. I mean, it's worth it. Forget about the money aspect, okay? I'm sure Dallas does just fine. He's got a nice contract. He doesn't have any kids or anything outstanding that I know of. But it's the experience is invaluable. And as you can see, things did fall apart, and we'll get into that in just a few minutes. But first, before we move on, David, I want to give a quick shout out to Tony Doherty, who you mentioned. He's a very good friend of mine. He's the promoter of the Arnold Australia. He promoted his own show for many years before that. And Tony is simply he's one of my absolute favorite people in this industry. He is such a fan of bodybuilding. He's such a good guy, a big heart. This guy has done more for more bodybuilders over the years than almost anybody that I know. So congratulations to Tony.
Yeah, and the thing is, he's got the now, mind you, the Arnold Australia was the Australian Grand Prix since I believe 2000 or 2001. Right. So if you look at the longest running shows that are currently in the IFBB, aside from the Arnold, the Olympia, and the New York Pro, which used to be the Night of Champions, I think he's got like the fourth longest running show.
I believe it.
Pretty sure in the IFBB. And guys have to fly 16 hours to get there.
Right.
And even when I first started, the first time I had met Tony, it was like, hey, I'm David Bay, I'm with MD. He's like, in his Australian accent, he's all right. Well, if there's anything you need, just holler and stuff like that. And of course, as a new person, you're like, okay, he's just saying that. But no, he took care of us. I mean, he was like, so you can tell a lot about a person, and I know there's quotes about how you treat people who are your equals and how you treat people who are lower than you, but you can tell a lot about a person not just as a promoter by how they treat people that are in those certain situations. Obviously, Tony's going to treat the athletes like rock stars because that's getting them there, but it's not just that. He treats everybody around him really well, and that's why he's able to put on such a good production. So
well,
you're down here as far as the athletes go is a great event.
I'm going to skip forward a little bit. As most people that watch our show knows, they're pretty in tune to the bodybuilding community and what goes on. These guys follow everything. So we'll skip all the mundane stuff and get to the good stuff, at least from a gossipy type of view. Some people would argue that it's not good, especially for the industry. But listen, it is what it is. Obviously, a big country gets to Australia. Things do not go as planned. Actually, they completely fall apart. To the point of passing out on stage and having to get help. By the way, big props to Big Al out there. And for people that don't know who Big Al is the big expediter that you see on stage. Kind of gray hair, great guy. Al is one of those guys. And poor Al, I was thinking about this earlier. You and I were talking before we went on the air about, it's been years literally since I can remember somebody going down on stage. If memory serves, the last time somebody went down on stage, it had to be a good, I'll just take a guess and say 6-7 years ago. All right. I could be off with that, but 6-7 years ago, a guy named Amin Schultz went down on stage and projectile vomited all over the place. The guy who was there to catch him, Big Al.
Yeah.
so he
And
seems to be a magnet for these guys.
I've covered a ton of shows where Al's on stage, and he's one of these guys where he's been to enough shows, and he's watching the athletes. He's not
Oh,
just
yeah.
sitting in the back there twiddling his thumbs. He's watching the guys, make sure everybody's okay, even everything down to, hey, is somebody when they come off for the next set of call-outs, so they need their tan touched up. So he was keeping a close eye on things. If you watch the video, you could see Dallas was starting to struggle a little bit, so Al kept a really close eye on him. And the second he started going a little bit, because had somebody waited another 2-3 seconons, Dallas might have physically gone down. So definitely.
Luckily for us, Al has cat-like reflexes still to this day. But you know what? Listen, Al was a bodybuilder's best friend when you're on stage, man. I tell you that. So, big props to Al for stepping up and doing what he does. Now that said, Dallas does go down. Obviously, it's 9 times out of 10 a dehydration issue. Now this is where it gets funky. Okay, he does not make it back, and I think Big Steve Weinberger. I think Dallas wanted to get back on stage at some point. At least from what I hear.
From what I hear, he wanted to go back, so he wasn't ready to.
Listen, good move on Steve's part. Like I say, would not have been wise, not advisable, not the right advices. Listen, you keep a guy off the stage at that point for his own safety. And Big Steve's been around the game longer than anybody. He knows that. So good for him. This is where it gets funky. Our old colleague, and by old I mean he's old, over 50, Shawn Ray, has made some choice comments that did not sit well with Dallas, as we all know. Dallas kind of rebutted and kind of put his 2 cents out there on a long Facebook post, kind of an item-by-item type of thing.
Right.
Firing back and, calling Shawn bitter and old and this and that. Let me just say this. First of all, Shawn's been in this game longer than Dallas has been alive, clearly. You cannot dispute his record. Whether you like him, hate him, or anything in between, Shawn has his fair share of detractors out there for whatever reason. They don't like him. They don't like what he stands for. They don't like his opinion, whatever. What you can't deny is his record. This guy was a top Olympian. He should have won an Olympia or 2, in my opinion. That being what it is, he's entitled to his opinion. He's been covering the sport for many, many years. He's very opinionated, which is great when you're a journalist in this game. That's what he gets paid to do. Now, whether you agree or disagree with him, that's a different deal.
Yeah, I think Shawn, and having worked beside him for a number of years, I definitely think his quote unquote bedside manner could probably be a little better. But that's fair. That's not Shawn, and that's never been Shawn. And I think one of the biggest things, and it was interesting because from the time I worked with Shawn, I would see him make some comments about some guys not looking so good, and these guys would be like, "Fuck Shawn." And then I would see him be like, they brought it a lot better this time. And then they'd be like, "Oh, that's cool. Shawn says I look good." And sometimes I think Shawn might lose sight of sometimes, and I think a lot of people in his position in general lose sight of, is who they really are. And I was talking to somebody about it today, a friend of mine who knows a little bit about bodybuilding, and I said, it would be like if some college kid posted a video of him throwing a football on Facebook. And you had 100 people telling him he sucked and his form was bad and whatever. It's easy to brush that off.
Sure.
Now, Aaron Rodgers or Tom Brady comes on that video and says, "You know what, kid, you suck at throwing the ball." That cuts a lot deeper. And so anybody that's competed in bodybuilding, or even picked up a weight and started following the sport of bodybuilding for the last 25 years, at some point or another, before you knew him personally or saw his antics, has looked up to Shawn Ray. I know when I started, got into it right around 1990, I mean, the guy was larger than life. And regardless of what he says about your physique, any critique about your physique that might come across as being insulting is going to hurt a lot more than it would from other people. And I think in this industry, you have to have thick skin, not on stage.
Clearly.
You have to have thick skin, and I think a lot of these guys do. They learn to, I'm not going to let what people on social media and on the internet and stuff bother me. But when somebody that you look up to has some harsh words for you, whether it's their intention to hurt your feelings or not, it's definitely going to take more of a toll on you. And I always joked with people, I'm like, one of the risks of my job when I got it was that all of a sudden I'm working alongside all these guys I've looked up to my whole life. And you run the risk of finding out that they might be assholes.
Yeah, well, it's
like you just ruined my childhood, But look, and I'm not going to defend Shawn because I think he could have handled this better. But I will say this about Shawn, and Dallas might not want to hear this, and the other people might not want to hear this. I've heard Shawn say plenty of stuff off camera where it's like, he might go even a little bit more, over the top on camera and in public just because that's his persona. And I can tell you, Shawn, look, for as much as Dallas is mad at Shawn right now and the guys at Redcon and everybody else, and again, I'm not saying Shawn handled this necessarily the way he could have. Shawn thinks Dallas has a lot of potential. And he said such in the past. So I don't think he's trying to...
Let me tell you something on that, David. There's a video which I'll hold up. Don't know if you can see that, but there's an actual video that's up, and I'm showing this because people can actually look up. It's on YouTube. Okay, that's what it looks like, of Shawn saying, and this is before Columbus, that he thinks Dallas is more than likely your next Mr. Olympia. Now, he didn't mean this year. What he means is when Phil's done collecting Sandows, that this guy could easily step in and fulfill that role. And as far as he's concerned, he is a future Mr. Olympia. And he went on with a few other accolades. Now, this is the same guy that also has, had some harsh critique. So you can say what you want about Shawn, but listen, he keeps it about as real as it gets. He knows physiques better than almost anybody I know in this industry. That he knows. And listen, he's going to have you got to take the good with the bad. You hit it right on the head, David. You better get a thicker skin, Dallas, if you want to be in this game, because he's not going to be the only. You're going to have. Listen, you're probably going to lose more shows than you're going to win. Okay, that's not a knock on Dallas, by the way. That's pretty much anybody in this game.
Yeah, FPV Pro. Yeah, and I think it was Shawn went after. And look, this is nothing new, and this certainly wasn't directed at Chad Nichols or exclude this type of commentary. I shouldn't say isn't directed exclusively at Chad Nichols, because Shawn has gone after just about every guru for as long as I've been working with Shawn. And he doesn't like them, and I think that also really set Dallas off because it's like if somebody does something to me, I'm going to blow it off. Somebody does something to my friends or my family or somebody who I feel really close, then I'm going to come on loose on your ass. Like I said, you punch me in the face, I might punch you back a little bit. You punch my brother in the face, I'm going to murder you. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, sure.
And I think Dallas might have come back a little bit harder than he might have because he's developed a relationship with Chad and he feels like Chad is looking out for his best interest, and Shawn went after them too. But again, Shawn comes from an era where a lot of guys did stuff on their own and a lot of guys were more consistent doing stuff on their own.
Yeah.
And they learned their body. That being said, we gotta be real about Shawn here for a second. When it comes to bodybuilding, Shawn has better genetics than, and I'm not taking it. Look, you don't look like Shawn did in the gym or on stage without busting your ass. And there's some people who say, he didn't have to work hard. That's ridiculous. You don't get that body fat percentage. But Shawn has better genetics than 99.99 repeated a million times and then multiply that by 60 in the history of like bodybuilders and people. So Shawn dieting himself. Like most people, you start getting in contest shape, you have very little room for error.
Sure.
And obviously I don't know what Shawn's protocol was, but he learned his body very well. But you can't be naive enough to think that Shawn didn't make mistakes. So a second or third place at the Olympia, Shawn Ray, might have been him being off and him, not being as dry or and you can go back to some of Shawn's Olympia's appearances and say that he was better at some than others. But so for Shawn to tell some of the other bodybuilders, hey, you should learn your body and not use a coach, it's like, look, not everybody is going to and if you're competing once or twice a year, I mean, that's a trial and error process. So if I'm a young competitor, and I have mixed feelings about coaches too, but if I'm a young competitor and I see somebody who, hey, this guy has worked with a lot of top pros, sure. He helped Ronnie Coleman win 8 Mr. Olympias, why not give it a try, or why not see if he can help me? It's like having somebody come and say, hey, I've been here before. Well, it's like a coach or a teacher in any other instance. And that's the argument you can make on the flip side of what Shawn is saying. If you're learning to work on cars, if you're learning to paint a house, if you're learning to do anything, nobody's ever going to make the argument, well, figure it out how to do it your own and you'll be better off. No, if I'm going to learn how to fix cars, if I got somebody showing me how to do it and helping me along, eventually maybe I'll get it on my own. But you're usually going to be better off with a teacher or a coach or somebody who's been there. So I can't agree with Shawn 100%.
Listen,
everybody needs to do it on their own.
Shawn's coming from his perspective, okay, and this is what I want people to recognize and realize, especially Dallas if he's watching. Again, you may not agree with everything Shawn says. That's fine, but he is absolutely entitled to his opinion. He's in this business. That's what he does. Now, where it started was weeks and weeks before the Arnold Columbus, when Dallas and Chad went to see Jim Mannion. We all know the posing video, and Shawn was very critical of that video and what it represented. Now, listen, he is absolutely entitled to that opinion. I mean, listen, was he justified in it? Well, listen, Dallas did take second at the Arnold. Like I say, was it his best? No, but, you're going to pick and choose what you want from that. But much like, athletes in other sports, okay, you're a baseball player, football player, whatever. You better get used to the press, and you better get used to people critiquing you or whatever. It's going to continue from now until the day you stop competing. You will always get critiqued. That's what people do in this industry that work in that capacity. And Shawn has a very valid opinion when it comes to physiques and, his assessment. Now, if you don't really give a shit, then this wouldn't bother you. So I agree with you. I mean, clearly it upset Dallas. And again, he's a young guy who's making his way in this business. But, to call Shawn, what he did, he's a has-been, he's bitter. First of all, Shawn doesn't have one thing to be bitter about in this bodybuilding world. This guy, and I've known Shawn longer than anybody in this industry. We go back as teens when we competed at the Teenage Nationals together. And there was a bunch of other things in there. He's born with a silver spoon in his mouth. Let me explain something about Shawn Ray, okay? I knew his father, rest his soul. He was a very nice gentleman. He was a janitor for 40 years, whatever it was. He did not come from a very affluent household. They weren't broke. Both his parents worked. His father did okay, but again, he was a janitor, man. I mean, Shawn, when he was a kid coming up, he was cleaning toilets and stuff. You know what I mean? Trying to make a few bucks as a kid. Since that point, Shawn worked himself into a great position in bodybuilding. Shawn has never worked a real job in his life. All right?
I laugh at it, but it's not a bad thing.
It's true. Again, I don't say that to be condescending. Right. I'm using that as a huge, wow, you got to be kidding me. He has never worked a, quote, real job in his life. Every job he's ever had, from when we were basically 17 years old to now, has been in the bodybuilding industry. He turned pro at 21, winning the national championships, and boom, a Weider contract, travel the world, right to the Olympia, that whole thing, and never looked back. So you got to give him his due respect when it comes to that. Bitter? What's he got to be bitter about? He pretty much accomplished everything he wanted to. Yeah, he never did get the Sandow, but you know what? That wasn't his fault. Like I said, I got him with at least 2.
Yeah, I mean, I did look. I've kind of come off the handle a few times, and I'm not talking about my exiting MD.
No.
I'm not talking about my exiting MD interview at all, because I have zero regrets for that. But I'm talking other stuff that bodybuilding fans or whatever will never see.
Right.
My brothers know them all too well. But I've come off the handle a few times and shot off my mouth. And I'm not even going to say I don't want to say shot off my mouth, because I'm not saying that's what Dallas did. I guess just said some things based on emotion. And that might not be Dallas's case. You might ask Dallas 2 weeks from now, 3 weeks from now, and he might say, you know what? No, that's how I felt. That's how I still feel.
Yeah,
but, he expressed his opinions, and he did get a little bit harsh at Shawn. And I think part of that was because Shawn got harsh with him. And I go back to other industries and other sports industries, and if you watch Terry Bradshaw, I watch a ton of NFL. I'm a huge football fan. If you watch Terry Bradshaw talk about, Aaron Rodgers or Tom Brady or what they need to fix or how they need to do stuff different, it's usually very constructive criticism. Now, granted, it's hard to compare the bodybuilding industry to any other sporting industry, but usually in a situation where you have some kind of icon talking about a younger person, usually it's done in a manner where it's not as critical as Shawn did with Dallas or Chad. But it comes back to Shawn being Shawn. Shawn felt his points were valid. And like I said, I try not to make personal conversations public information too much, because I just don't feel like that's what you should do.
Right.
But I think at the Olympia, Shawn's exact words were about Dallas is, I think I can say, quote, "The kid's got the world by the balls," pretty much.
Yeah.
Because if you look at and and that's a legit statement. If you look at the guys who are at the Olympia right now that can roll with Dallas, if Dallas gets a little bigger and comes in good shape, you have an easy time counting them on one hand. So
Well,
I look behind the scenes. I've heard Shawn say good stuff about Dallas, but he's and the thing is Dallas has to understand, and every other competitor, you are not alone in Shawn critiquing you and saying harsh things
correct.
about you. And a lot of it is like, I lost my shit completely on some kids riding their bike in the middle of the road last year. I'm coming home, driving down, dog in the passenger seat. These kids are riding their bike right in the middle of the road. I literally almost hit these kids because I'm like, I'm not moving. I'm in the road,
Right.
I almost hit these kids. I get out of my car and I come unglued on these kids. They're probably 12, 13 years old enough to know better to be riding the road. And I had a lot of choice words, probably said some things I shouldn't yell at kids who are under the age of 18. But when I was done with all of it, I was like, look, man, had I been messing with my radio or if I had a couple of drinks or anything else, you two could be dead right now because you were trying to do some stupid shit.
Right.
And I think sometimes Shawn's angle, and I'm not going to, look, sometimes Shawn just shakes his head and says this person, doesn't belong here.
Right.
But I think the more potentials a person has, it's almost like the more susceptible they're going to be to some of that critique because it's like you're wasting it kind of attitude,
Well,
or like,
I think that's very accurate.
And so I think Shawn's looking at Dallas and kind of being like, kind of shaking his head like, why are you doing this? And I think one of Shawn's big points that people are ignoring is that he did say just slow down, slow down a little bit.
You're right about that. Shawn doesn't waste a lot of words with people. In his opinion, he doesn't think are really going anywhere anyways. That's, again, not a knock on them, but he'll kind of gloss by it. And if you've ever watched any of his commentary at the shows,
if he thinks you suck, he
yeah,
doesn't even comment. He just says not ready, not ready.
And again, to your point earlier, it's not just in private conversation. I just held up that video. If anybody wants to watch it, like I say, just go on YouTube. It's right there on the front. He says, and I do quote, "This kid you're looking at your next Mr. Olympia." Now, listen, that's a pretty lofty statement from somebody who knows this industry pretty much better than anybody, you know what I mean, who has, 40 years of experience into this business, in this game in various aspects. He says, this kid he's the guy, kind of. He can do it. He's got all the tools. He's got so yeah, he's going to be harder on a Dallas McCarver than he is on somebody else that he doesn't feel just would even warrant wasting any unnecessary words on him and critique. He just doesn't do it. Now, listen, I think, and I've said this for years, you've heard me say this a million times, I still think there should be a moratorium on bodybuilders speaking 24 hours before or after a show. Because, well, you're talking on emotion, and listen, you can see Dallas is very emotional. We saw the video that he was so distraught after losing New Zealand that, he literally had tears in his eyes, and he felt as if he let everybody down. Now, that tells me a whole lot, if you want to go the whole Freudian route. And what it tells me is that this guy has placed such pressure on himself,
he really
and expectations, has. David, that's the emotional place he was in. I mean, listen, like I say, it's not like he got completely trounced or, he did. I mean, come on, the kid looked good. You know what I mean? He had a very good Brandon Curry, that was certainly no slouch. And anyway, the best Brandon Curry we've seen. And like I said, this guy, he wants to, take the next ledge because he lost. It's like, look, man, I get it and all that stuff, but, calm down a little bit. Take it easy. Take it slow.
I tell you what, I think Dallas is an absolutely phenomenal bodybuilder. I will look. He's got to make sure, like we say about everybody, that he keeps his stomach in control. He probably needs to grow a little. But when I interviewed Jay Cutler a month and a half ago, Jay, who's the next Mr. Olympia? Jay, Dallas McCarver. You asked Shawn, who's the next Mr. Olympia? Dallas McCarver.
Yeah.
Dallas has an incredibly bright future, but yeah, he's putting a lot of pressure on himself, and he's the face of a new supplement company too. I mean, that's obviously a little bit of pressure. When he was at BSN, they had Rulli and they had Flex Lewis and stuff like that. I mean, so that's going to add pressure. But the kids, every time somebody comes out and the bodybuilding community deems them as the next big thing, it puts a lot of pressure, and people really don't realize this. And I come back to the, Dallas needs to go on YouTube and watch the janitor to Rudy speech a couple times.
Right.
When Rudy says, I wanted to prove to my dad and prove to people, and the janitor cuts him off and says, prove what? And he goes through his list of accomplishments, and I could
Sure.
look, Dallas, you turned pro at 22 years old. You won your first pro show.
Right.
You're ranked 8th in the world at 25 years old. You've won 2 pro shows already. You dominated a field at Chicago. You ain't got nothing to prove to nobody except yourself. And if you haven't done it by now, it ain't going to never happen. So
There it is. Famous
both,
quotes.
I've watched way too many movies, and I can quote too many of them. But Rudy's a good movie to be able to quote. So Dallas needs to. I think Dallas is phenomenal, and
Well,
I think for as much as like this, there's sides of Shawn I agree with, sides of Dallas I agree with, but the thing that I'm 100% convicted on is that Dallas has got a very bright future in front of himself. I would like to see him slow it down just a little bit,
Yeah.
but if you talk to the kid, he's a competitor.
Oh yeah.
And a lot of us bodybuilding are like fierce competitors. Whether you're like, look, man, I don't like losing at Monopoly. I don't like losing me and my buddies will play Madden, and we're all the same way. Like, I don't like losing in a game of Madden.
Yeah,
So
right.
I can imagine, and I've been on bodybuilding stages, not even close to where he's at. So I can only imagine the desire to win, the pressure he puts on himself to win. I know that even for me to win a local show, like, okay, a ton of pressure on myself. So Dallas is going to be fine, and
Well, he's got to learn to channel that anger and energy into his own self. And don't come up with excuses. Don't even say nothing. Obviously, there's speculation that he said that he's got upper respiratory infection or bronchitis or possible even pneumonia. Listen, that could be very much true. But one thing I will agree with Shawn on is it doesn't really matter. His argument to Shawn was in that little excerpt that Shawn put out there, the back and forth conversation, and I did actually talk to Shawn about that, was that he didn't know the backstory. And my comment to that was, what's the difference what your backstory is? And this isn't, again, against Dallas. I love Dallas. I'm a huge fan of his. I love big country, man. Like I say, this kid's the next coming.
we all do. Everybody who's
Yeah.
had a chance to talk to him, interact with him, we all do.
And it's a big but. You do not go out there. The judges are judging your physique.
Whatever
You don't
bring
get to
that
give
kid,
them a backstory. You don't get to bring a resume. You don't get to explain why you look like you look, or whether it be good or bad. You don't. And it's the same thing when it comes to a Shawn Ray or anybody in that boat, because we're in the same boat when it comes to being journalists or whatever you want to call us that cover this sport. It doesn't really matter what the backstory is, because my comeback is that, well, then you shouldn't have done it, or then you shouldn't have gone to the show, or well, then you shouldn't have videotaped it, or whatever. That's bodybuilding. That's what makes our business unique. And sports, if you want to call it that, people want to argue about that one all the time, but I don't really care what they call it. It is what it is. So, and it's not to take away. Listen, nobody cares what you had to overcome. Nobody cares what obstacles you had, or your family life, or your personal life. When you step on stage, the only thing they care about is what you look like in comparison to everybody else. That's it. So
Yeah. I mean,
nobody cares
bodybuilding,
if you were sick.
To just to look at it that from a different angle, bodybuilding I think is a little bit more difficult from some of the other sports, because usually, you're talking 12, 14, 16 weeks of prep as far as just the diet. Maybe if you took off a year so you're talking a year. And if you do get sick, man, that sucks. I mean, because you've had, you put in so much work, so much effort, and to have your body go against you, when you're leading into a show. And this does happen. And I'm no doctor, but what I do know is that when you're that depleted, as far as your body fat levels being that low, everything else, your immune system's probably not as strong as it's going to be, in your otherwise off-season condition. As far as the whole sick thing, and I get why these guys do this, because look, everybody wants to be seen as a competitor. They want to fight for stuff. And we talked about this earlier. I almost feel like, and I probably wouldn't have said this a couple of years ago, but I almost feel like guys would be a little bit better off now if they were just open, if they were battling illness. If a couple of weeks before the Arnold, hey guys, I'm battling some respiratory issues. I'm going to do my best to make it there and whatever. And a lot of guys think, okay, that's not anybody's business, and it's going to look like an excuse. Mm-hmm. And now we've gotten to the point where we've heard it so much, stomach this or this, and I'm not saying I'm not saying that Dallas made excuses. I don't know his situation at all, so we'll make it very clear that's not what I'm doing. But I think in today's day and age, as a bodybuilder, you're almost better making it known leading into a show that, hey, I'm battling some issues. I'm still going to do my best. I'm fighting through this. Wish me luck. Because coming out after now and saying, well, I didn't say this because I didn't want to seem like I was making excuses. It kind of, and again, I'm not specifying Dallas. I know Guy Cisternino had some issues before the Arnold, so I'm not pointing fingers at anybody in particular. I'm just saying, as bodybuilders, and this goes all the way from the NPC up to the IFBB. Sure. You'll see it a lot more at local shows than anywhere else. But if you've got some issues and you come out afterwards and say, hey, I was dealing with this, usually that's not, like in today's day and age, you're not getting any more respect for saying after the fact that it was something you were leading into it. Yeah, because now it's what people are starting to look like it is like, okay, well, now you're in a lot of, look, like I said, I know Dallas. I don't think he's making shit up.
No, I don't think so either.
But look, I know a lot of people who do make shit up. So
do I.
So
here's the thing, though, David. In a nutshell, you can't say I didn't want to mention anything because I didn't want it to be an excuse, but then mention it afterwards.
Yeah, it's
like I don't think they understand the hypocrisy behind that. The other problem is these millennials are growing up in a different world than even you or I did, and you're obviously younger than I am, but you didn't even grow up in this type of thing where everything is broadcast, 24/7 of everything from what you ate to your posing to this to that to just updates of what you're thinking or doing. So they live their life online, and listen, if you're going to do that, that's fine, but you better be consistent with it. You know what I mean? Just let it all fly if that's what you're going to do.
I'm glad there wasn't Facebook and Instagram when I was, 21, 22, 23, 25 years old. I was a relatively level-headed kid, but I know I did a lot of douchey stuff. And I'm okay admitting that I'm afraid if there was Facebook or Instagram when I was in my early 20s, I would have made an idiot out of myself. And I'm not saying Dallas is at all. I'm just saying that it's a totally different atmosphere. And that's another thing that guys, even like myself and Shawn, has to take into consideration is that the younger guys today are it's just a completely different atmosphere. I mean, when you talk about, Shawn training, he would go to the gym. I'm sure everybody at Gold's told him how phenomenal he looked. He went home, he went about his day, ate his food, drove around in his Lambo. Everybody's, teaches up to Shawn, went back to the gym tomorrow. Everybody told you how great you look. And so it's all this encouragement and this positivity. And now it's like, you're dealing, and granted, a lot of hey, look, nobody's saying you have to be on, well, actually, supplement companies and your sponsors contracts are saying you have to be on social media.
Correct.
Just, people have to deal with stuff differently now than they ever had. And that it has an effect on you professionally. It has an effect on you emotionally. And if you don't think a guy who's 25 years old that's having people say one person say he's the next Mr. Olympia and another person saying he's going to be burnt out before he's 30, which the people saying that I think are idiots.
Of course, but you're going to have to take the good with the bad, man, if you're going to put your stuff out there.
And so the kids today and the younger guys today, they do have it different. And so us older guys, and I guess I'm getting older, have to take into consideration that they're dealing with stuff that and pressures that they never dealt with. I mean, you could get ready, 25 years ago, you could get ready for a show without having somebody tell you every other week, oh, you're behind, or you're too soft, or you're holding water, or this, and 87 different people giving you an opinion. Now you can't even post a progress picture anymore, which everybody expects.
As
a million people tell
as somebody who was there, because me and Shawn are the exact same age, 51, I can assure you, you surrounded yourself with who you wanted to surround yourself with. Any negativity you had was purely local. It was in the local gym. Maybe there was some jealousy there, for people that hadn't made it yet, or, you kind of leapfrogged past them in terms of your development and or your placings, competitions. But you generally didn't have this open forum of anybody and everybody with an opinion. And listen, just because everybody has an opinion doesn't mean it's a qualified opinion. Absolutely. This is the biggest difference with the internet these days, is on the forums and all that type of stuff. And I've been arguing with these guys for years. Look at, I have an opinion too. It's like, well, just because you have one doesn't mean you're coming from a place of know-how. Doesn't mean you're coming from a place of experience, okay? I was there. I did it, been there, done that, walked the walk. Shawn Ray, all three of those things. And then some, as this guy was a top Olympian for, 12 years in the top 5? That may not be equaled by anybody short of a Phil Heath himself or a Dexter Jackson.
Top 5 Olympian for 12 years running is
that's
and,
elite.
And you have to keep in mind, this was when there was no 212.
No, listen. There was no 212.
Let's take, and this doesn't have to be a Shawn Ray session, but let's take the 212 guys today, and how many of them would make the there isn't a 212. Look, this is no disrespect to Flex Lewis, and I've put out there a billion times over how much I love Flex. Flex would not have been able to stand next to Phil, Roden, Ruley, Ramy, Dexter Jackson, and the top 5 at the Olympia this year. He wouldn't have been able to do it. He may have gotten maybe 6th or 7th or 8th. I don't know. But for Shawn to weigh 210 pounds, and look, he wasn't competing against small guys, Coleman, Lavrone, Wheeler, Nasser. I mean, he was competing against big competitors. So there's a lot to be said for that. So, yeah, Shawn did something it's really unheard of in the weight that he.
And he took the critique. Look, you're going to take critique. It's going to happen.
One of the things that Shawn's taken a little heat on, which, as you know, I like investigating both sides of the argument.
Yes, you
do. Is somebody, a lot of people have brought up a good point. Like, look, Shawn was one to be outspoken and
absolutely
and negative a little bit, after his shows or his placings or leading into his show. But
he had good reason to be.
He didn't have a platform like he has today. No. Now, you take Shawn Ray with his same attitude from 1987 through 2001, and give him a platform where he can reach out to a million people. What kind of things would Shawn Ray be saying? And it's question.
Here's the bottom line. Dallas, I love you, man. You're as big country as they come, from Blue Goose, Tennessee.
Blue Goose, Tennessee.
Gotta love that, buddy. Listen, get back to the business of bodybuilding. Forget all this stuff. Forget about this war with. First of all, you're not going to win a debate with Shawn Ray. All right, that's something you learned a long time ago. Okay, you're not going to win. It's not going to happen. He will have the last word, no matter how you dice it. And guess what? He's going to be covering shows for a long time to come with you in him. So I ain't saying you got to be best buddies. I ain't saying you're going to be breaking bread anytime soon, and he's going to be picking up the bill. Okay, something's just ain't going to happen. However, see what I just did there? However, here's the bottom line, man. Get back to the business of bodybuilding. Get back in the gym. Get yourself back here. Get yourself back acclimated and get some food in you, son. You know what I mean? And get back to the business of what you were born to do. And, hopefully we'll see Dallas in maybe one of the late shows, because I would sure hope that he doesn't bypass a chance at the Olympia this year. He's going to win a show. Go back to Chicago. Defend your title. Whatever. But forget about Shawn Ray. Forget about anybody else for that matter that's got. I don't care if it's a Palumbo or if it's even one of us. Listen, forget about David Bay. Who cares what he's got to say?
Literally.
I don't listen to anything he says either. So, but the bottom line is this, man. Look, you're going to have people that love you. You're going to have people that hate you, man. You better get used to it now. You better grow that thicker skin. That everywhere other than on stage, as we always like to say. But it's going to happen, man. So learn to live with it. But get yourself right, man. You got to be a little bit tougher than that. And I know this kid's tough mentally, but that's the bottom line, bro. He's going to have to kind of do this if he wants to live for any duration in bodybuilding history.
Yeah, no, I think like I said earlier, I think Dallas should go on YouTube, watch the Rudy speech a few times.
Rudy,
like I said, Dallas, you don't have shit to prove to anybody. And I mean that in the absolute best way possible. You're 25 years old, ranked in top 10 in the entire world.
You're doing all right, kid.
That's pretty hard to wrap your head around. I'm 25. I'm top 10 in the whole world at what I do. And,
Listen,
one of the biggest humans walking around. He's one of the biggest humans walking the face of the entire earth right now. So, no, Dallas is going to be all right. I would like to see the drama fizzle out, which, I think it will. And I think we'll see Dallas back to, being a better version of Dallas. and he'll learn from the experience and move forward. So
Yeah, well, listen,
Brandon Curry won an Arnold this weekend. So
yeah. In other news, congratulations to Brandon Curry. Now, listen, if I'm Brandon Curry right now in his camp, and again, I don't know if he has anybody that guides him in that direction. I don't know if it's anybody out of the Camel Crew. By the way, when we say Camel Crew, this is not anything that they look at down upon or anything. They actually have shirts. I actually have one that Bader Bodai gave me at the Arnold that say Camel Crew. It's got a camel on there. It says Camel Crew. So it's a term.
It's not.
Yeah, it's a term of endearment. Just to clear that up, because I know people they thought it was kind of condescending before. I'm like, no, man, they're the ones that came up with it.
That's what Dennis James. They're
I think it's kind of cool actually. But whoever guides him, again, my suggestion, shut it down. Shut it down,
yeah,
man.
I think Brandon at this point, he could probably tighten up a little bit. He could probably, there's the Arnold Brazil coming up, Arnold South Africa, New York.
Skip them all, man. Skip them all.
For him, he's already won 2 shows. He's won an Arnold Classic, which is huge. And I know I shouldn't say I know it's his goal. I'm going to assume with a fair level of confidence that it's his goal to get back into top placings at the Olympia. And I think obviously the time off of competing and his time training over in Kuwait has done him wonders. And I don't know if he's going to go back there or try to take that training style and come back here. But if he keeps doing whatever it was he was doing over there, regardless of what side of the world he's on, he could do very well at the Olympia. So I agree with you. I think it's probably in his best interest.
He's definitely going back over. He's already said as much. Now I don't know when that time frame is. If I was him, I might think that to shut it down now, going on pure off season / Olympia prep mode. I mean, think about this, man. He just took care of biz. All right, it's March. He's got April, May, June, July, August, and September. Half of September. He's got almost 6 months of training now to go for the Olympia. You want to talk about making some progress? Maybe he shuts it down now for a while, tends to family. I know he's got a whole bunch of kids, and a big family to take care of. And maybe you go over there a few months out of the Olympia, to kind of guide it in. I tell you what. He could be knocking on that top 6 very easily.
Yeah, oh yeah, he could. And just a real quick, which is hard for me. To all the guys, anytime we bring up the Camel Crew, I think this is important. I've talked to Abdullah, I've talked to all those guys. What's going on over in Kuwait? I'll tell you what's going on over in Kuwait. And I've had
personal conversations
with half of the guys that have gone over there. Look, it is bodybuilding boot camp. You remember in Rocky IV when he went to train in Siberia and he was living in the cabin and all he could do was train and play chess? That's pretty much what's going on in Kuwait. They are on a schedule where they're sleeping their 8 hours. They're napping another 2 or 3 hours. They're having their food delivered to them 7 times a day. They're training twice a day. They're going through incredibly rigorous training routines, the type of shit where you got guys taking the weight off the bar. They're going nuts over there. 2-a-day training sessions, perfect nutrition. They're sleeping as much as 12, even more hours a day. What is going on over there is bodybuilding boot camp. There isn't any sort of magic, anything. And when you look at the pros, and you and I know, like a lot of the pros today, they work very hard, but are they putting themselves in that sort of environment where it's literally eat, sleep, and train? No, most people, you can't if you got a life outside of bodybuilding.
Yeah, if you've got a life, a family, a business, or things to attend. Listen, you don't do anything over there other than bodybuilding.
That's it.
I was at this gym. I was actually
food to you.
I was actually at the gym. I was at the gym that they're training at now. It's the brand new one that Bader just had built. When I tell you this thing is insane, I told you when I came back from there, it is the most outrageous thing I've ever seen. And I've seen gyms all over the world. I've been in the best. It is absolutely stupid. It's 4 stories. The entire second floor is a pool with various other pools within it. Hot tub, a cold plunge, a thing you can swim against the current. I mean, it's ridiculous, David. And 2 full floors of state-of-the-art weight equipment. Anything you want is there. I mean, it is.
And no women to distract you.
No, there's no chicks. They actually do not.
Think about how much more I could get done at the gym.
Bro, you could have been Mr. Olympia if you actually.
If there wasn't any, and the thing is the other thing is they're not letting you BS. Look, when I get into contest prep mode, I'm pretty focused at the gym. 75 for my friends are buddies I met at the gym. But I look, I'd like to think I train hard, but I know I could make more progress if I went to a gym and just put my head down and focus. So again, everybody wondering what's going on over there, it is boot camp. That's all it is, bodybuilding. And if you could take somebody who's already got elite superior genetics and put them into 6 months of nothing but bodybuilding boot camp, eat, sleep, and the sleeping 12 hours a day alone. How many people get 12 hours of sleep a day? Nobody.
Not me.
So that's what's going on over in Kuwait, guys. There's nothing magical and crazy. They don't have secret sauce. They're not on a bunch of supplements that we don't have over here in the United States. That's not the case. It is boot camp.
Or anabolic chicken, as if you listen to Ruli. So they've actually got shirts with that on it now, which is actually pretty funny. But they got a good sense of humor about them. I'll give them that.
They do. But Abdullah, when I talked to Abdullah, and this was in De La Rosa's hotel room before Tampa, he almost took offense to the fact that they think there's something magical going on over here, because it detracts from the fact that these guys are just busting their balls. It's like, no, we don't have any magic secrets.
No, we don't.
In his mind, that is taking away from their ability as coaches and as trainers, saying that they have something other people don't. No, other people have the exact same access to what they have as far as the lifestyle. It's just hard to replicate over here, again, when you have full-time life as far as being a bodybuilder.
Well, listen, you can't discount everything you mentioned, and it takes me back to, when I was an amateur, and, like you say, you didn't have any family, you didn't have any other, anything to really take you aside from that. When you had blinders on and that's what you were doing, that's when you made your best progress. And that's what they're doing, and you're exactly right. So, hey, listen, it'll be an interesting year for Brandon Curry. Congratulations to him. And let's face it, it'll be an interesting year for Dallas McCarver. We've kind of zeroed in on these guys for this episode. Let's not throw in a towel yet. I mean, people, Dallas, okay, listen, he wasn't feeling well. They took him off the stage. Listen, the kid ain't done. They make it sound like that's it for him, I guess. It's like, guys, take a chill pill here, man. Listen, he'll be just fine, okay?
I saw somebody on a Facebook page doing in support of Dallas, and they titled their video.
In support.
They titled their video, "Dallas McCarver Isn't Done," and I watched it. And
Who said he was?
I told you this, Bob. It reminds me of the movie Jerry Maguire, when Jerry's wife goes, "And you're not a loser," and he goes, "What? Who said anything about being a loser?" And she had to backtrack. And
That's perfect.
I thought it was funny seeing a video.
Yeah,
Dallas isn't done. Yeah, well, no shit. Thanks, Einstein, for the late breaking news. Have you heard we landed on the moon as well?
Can you imagine a scenario where a baseball player goes 0 for 4 and they're talking about how he might be done, and let's just
Alex Rodriguez bat 0 for 4 in game 35 of 162. Don't worry, he's not done.
He's not done yet. It's like, yeah, we know. Okay, just listen. He'll be just fine. All right, he will rebound. I can almost boldly predict he will be back, hopefully maybe to defend his title in Chicago or one of those other shows. And I'll guarantee you right now, you'll probably see the best Dallas you've ever seen, and en route to the Olympia, where I thought he should have placed higher last year, just to show you how good Dallas was. So, I mean, he placed impressively last year. I still had him up another 2 spots. So yeah,
this
kid's good.
Sometimes things like this happening light a fire under people's butts that don't let sleeping dogs lie. Lighting a fire under Dallas McCarver's ass, not that saying that he didn't already have one with the way he trains, but giving Dallas more motivation to train harder probably isn't the best for the rest of the people he's got to stand on stage next to.
Well, with that, I'll say
he's going to go in and he's going to bust his ass, and he's going to do some big things.
Well, I'll say this as I always do, David: don't train harder, train smarter.
Smarter. Well, he'll train heavier, harder, smarter, the whole works.
Put that on a shirt. We can sell that here on the Last Rep site. So, well, David, we are out of time, my friend. That's going to wrap it up for this week's edition of the Last Rep. I don't think there's any pro shows this week. Certainly no men's pro shows, but season's ticking on. I'm sure we'll have plenty to report from the fallout of this last week next week. So that's going to wrap things up here for David Bay. I'm Bob Chick. We are out.